What if it really could just be that easy? What if the simple solution to you achieving all your hopes and dreams was really just simply cutting out all the rubbish that's in your life? Now, the reason I wanted to talk on this is because yesterday in the video I mentioned the fact that what is it going to take for you to actually stop doing all the bullshit in your life and actually living the life you want to live? What's it going to take for you to cut out the bad habits and go after and get after the things you actually want to do? Like, ultimately, like, what is it going to take? And that was a very closed-minded thing for me to say. Although it is true because I was genuinely curious, but also I just should have just looked into it. And having looked into it and looked into the dopamine response when it comes to modern day life, it made a ton more sense. Starting off, the human brain is terrible. And I say the human brain is terrible because it hasn't adapted to modern day life. And it makes sense, like it's not been around long enough to really adapt to modern day life, but it's running on old processing power. And what I mean by that is it is running on a processor that goes out to seek pleasure. And the reason it's built on this system is when we're in environments that are very scarce, there are very limited resources, it works at such a high degree. Like that's where it really thrives because going out and doing the things that give you pleasure are ultimately needed for your survival. If you do not do those things, you will die. So that's why our brain is wired. You think about that, that is the premise. That is how our brain operates. Now you put that into modern day life and you have all of these pretty intelligent people who have products and services they want to sell. How are they going to do that? Well, they are going to firstly just hijack your dopamine system because that is the thing that drives us to do anything. That is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. That is the thing that gets you to pick your hand up to put food in your mouth. That is the thing that gets you to walk outside and take a piss if that's something you do. So all of those things are derived by dopamine in some capacity. And because the human brain, although it is extremely complex, it is still very simple to abuse because it's very simple to know what it requires to release dopamine. And that's when we have things like fast food. And that's when we have things like social media. And that's when we have things like drugs. All of those things release insane amounts of dopamine for doing not a lot. So you can get absolutely jam-packed full of dopamine in a day and not have to do a whole lot to it or to achieve it or to get it. And that's great for these companies because they can get you addicted very, very quickly, but it's bad for your brain. And the reason it's bad for your brain is when you get rammed with dopamine or your body releases a lot of dopamine, what your body actually does is it wants to achieve homeostasis. I've not heard that word before. It basically means back to the normal or back to the natural position it wants to be in. So with your dopamine, it has to lower the overall release of dopamine. So it lowers your overall levels. And in turn, what this does is instead of going out and cutting a log, for example, for the fire, which would release this much dopamine because you need it for the warmth for your family. Now it only releases this much because sitting on your phone and scrolling Instagram reels releases this much. So there's an obvious order in which one you want to do. But in turn, it makes everyday mundane tasks very, very boring. And I say this from a position of someone who was working online, doing sales. I would spend every moment not on sales calls, just scrolling on anything. And then in the evenings, I would order fast food, which was highly calorific and it was highly dopamine releasing. But what this did is it made every other moment outside of those two things extremely boring. Like I hated my life. Like I've never been in such a bad position when from the outside it looked like things were going pretty well, which if anything just made everything worse. Now the crazy part is when I decided to limit or reduce the amount of time that I was spending doing those activities, the mundane things just became way more enjoyable. I started going back to the gym. I started reading again. I started doing everyday tasks, which I wasn't doing because they didn't release as much dopamine as the things that I was doing. So I had no desire. I had no desire to do anything other than those things. So to tie this all together, The reason you are not where you want to be is so, so simple, but it's so, so hard because you have to rewire your entire brain. And it's not as simple as just thinking, okay, yeah, I'm just going to change it, because the chances are you're going to fall back to your baseline, which your baseline is scrolling for 7 hours a day, whatever that may be. You have to really find a reason as to why you want to make a change. And if you've read the book Atomic Habits, you have to habit stack. So you have to find something to replace that habit, which is in some way comparable in enjoyment. It's not going to be as much, don't expect it to be, but have something that you can replace the old habit, i.e. scrolling, with something that could be just as enjoyable, such as reading a really, really good book. Hopefully it's been helpful. I'm just going to get some thoughts out there. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.